In a grove? The tale of the woodcutter questioned by the constable. Yes, indeed. I am the one who found that corpse. This morning, as usual, I went to the back mountain to cut some cedar trees. It was then that I came across the corpse in a thicket under the mountain shade. How far was it from the Yamashina station? It was about 4 or 5 cho away from the road. It was a deserted area, with thin cedars mixed among the bamboos. The corpse was lying on its back, wearing a pale blue garment, and a tattered hat typical of the capital. The wound, as I understand it, was a stab to the chest, so the fallen leaves around the body were stained a reddish hue, like suho, a type of dye. No, there was no blood flowing. The wound seemed to have dried up. To make matters worse, a horsefly was clinging to it, apparently oblivious to my footsteps. Did you see any swords? No, nothing of the sort. Just a piece of rope was lying at the base of the nearby cedar tree. And, oh yes, aside from the rope, there was a comb. Those were the only 2 things around the corpse. However, the grass and bamboo leaves were all trampled down, which surely indicates that the man must have struggled quite a bit before he was killed. What, was there no horse? Well, a horse could not have gotten into such a place. After all, the path for horses is separated by a thicket. The tale of the traveling priest questioned by the constable. I certainly encountered that corpse of the man yesterday. It was around noon, I suppose. The place was on the way from Sekiyama to Yamashina. The man was walking with a woman who was riding a horse. Since her hair was hanging down, I couldn't see her face. All I could see was the color of her kimono, which appeared to be a shade of bush clover. The horse was a light-colored one, indeed, it looked like a priest's horse. How tall was he? He must have been about 4 sun. After all, he was a monk, so I can't be certain of that. The man was, no, he had a sword, but he was also carrying a bow. I distinctly remember he had a black quiver slung over his shoulder with over 20 arrows in it. I never thought the man would come to such an end. Truly, the lives of human beings are as fleeting as dew or as a flash of lightning. How pitiful, I can hardly express it. The tale of the released prisoner questioned by the constable. Was it the man you captured? This was indeed Tajimaro, the famous thief. Although when I captured him, he must have fallen off his horse, groaning on the stone bridge at Wadaguchi. What time was it? It was around the first watch of last night. Some time ago, when I had missed the opportunity to capture him, he was also wearing this same pale blue garment and had a sword drawn. At that time, he also had arrows with him. Yes, the man who lay dead must have had, so it must be this Tajimaru who killed him. A bow wrapped in leather, a black quiver, and 17 arrows with hawk feathers, these were surely the things he possessed. Yes. The horse you mentioned is indeed that priest's light-colored one. It must be some kind of fate that he was brought down by that scoundrel. Just a little further from the stone bridge, I saw the horse grazing on the roadside with its reins still tied to a long tether. This Tajimaru is one of the thieves that roams around the capital, and he has a fondness for women. Last autumn, a woman who had come to pay respects at Tribe Temple, along with a girl, was said to have been killed by him. If the woman who was riding that light-colored horse has now become the victim of this man's crime, where she has gone is beyond my understanding. I apologize for my meddling, but please investigate this matter.
The tale of the old woman questioned by the constable. Yes, the corpse is that of a man my daughter was with. However, he is not from the capital. He was a samurai from the province of Wakasa. His name was Takahiro Kanazawa, and he was 26 years old. No, he was gentle and kind, so there's no way he had any enemies. And the girl? Her name is Masago, and she is 19 years old. She is a spirited girl, but she has never been with any man besides Takahiro. She has a somewhat dark complexion and a small face with a mole at the corner of her left eye. Takahiro left with my daughter for Wakasa yesterday, but how could this happen? As for my daughter, I have given up hope regarding her husband, but I cannot stop worrying about her. I humbly beg you, as an old woman, to inquire about my daughter's whereabouts, even if it means dividing the grass and trees. What makes it unbearable is that it was that thief, Tajimaru, who is to blame. Not only my son-in-law but my daughter as well. She breaks down into tears and cannot continue.
Confession of Tajimaru. I killed that man. However, women do not kill. So where has he gone? I do not know either. Well, wait a moment. No matter how much I am tortured, I cannot confess what I do not know. Moreover, I have no intention of cowardly hiding anything now that it has come to this. I met that couple just after noon yesterday. At that moment, a gust of wind blew, and the woman's flowing garment was lifted, allowing me to catch a glimpse of her face. Just a glimpse. By the time I thought I saw it, it had already vanished. Perhaps because of that, I saw the woman's face as if she were a bodhisattva. In that instant, I resolved that even if I killed the man, I would take the woman. What? Killing a man is not as great a matter as you might think. If one wishes to take a woman, the man must inevitably be killed. The only difference is that I use my sword when I kill, while you kill by power, by money, and sometimes even just with words that are mere pretenses. Indeed, there is no bloodshed, the man remains alive and well, yet still, he is killed. When I consider the depth of sin, I cannot determine whether you are wrong or I am wrong. Sarcastic smile. However, if I could take the woman without killing the man, that would suffice. No, at that moment, I resolved to take the woman while killing as few men as possible. But on the Yamashina road, such a thing was impossible. So I devised a way to lead that couple into the mountains. This was not difficult. When I became their companion, I told them that there was an ancient burial mound on the other side of the mountain, and that if they dug it up, they would find many treasures such as mirrors and swords. I offered to sell anything for a low price if they wished. The man began to be swayed by my words. After that, what do you think? Isn't greed fearsome? Before long, the couple was heading with me down the mountain path. When I reached the thicket, I told him that the treasure was buried inside and asked him to come and see. The man, being thirsty for wealth, had no objections. But the woman insisted on waiting without dismounting. Given how dense the thicket was, her reluctance was understandable. I confess that this was precisely what I hoped for. I entered the thicket with the man while leaving the woman behind. For a while, the thicket was just bamboo. But after walking about half a cho, there was a small clearing with cedars. This was the most convenient place for me to accomplish my task. I pushed through the thicket while lying about how the treasure was buried beneath the cedars. When I told him this, the man hurriedly made his way toward the clearing, eager to see it. As the bamboo grew sparser, several cedars lined up ahead. Before he could react, I suddenly tackled him to the ground. Though the man was armed with a sword and had considerable strength, he was caught off guard. In an instant, he was bound to the root of a cedar. Was it a rope? The rope was securely fastened to my waist, to prevent any escape. To keep him from shouting, I stuffed bamboo leaves into his mouth, and there was no further trouble. Once I had dealt with the man, I went back to the woman to tell her that her husband had suddenly fallen ill and needed her to come see him. I need not say how accurate this statement was. The woman, having taken off her straw hat, came with me into the thicket while taking my hand. However, when we got there, she saw her husband bound to the cedar root. Upon seeing this, she suddenly drew a small knife from her bosom. At that moment, I had never seen a woman so fierce. Had I been careless, she would have thrust it into my side in one stroke. Indeed, if I had managed to dodge, I could have been cut down mercilessly. But I am Tajamaro, and somehow, without drawing my sword, I managed to knock the small knife from her hand. No matter how strong-willed she may be, she could do nothing without a weapon. Finally, I succeeded in taking the woman without having to take the man's life. Though I did not intend to take the man's life, indeed, I had no intention of killing him. However, as I was about to escape with the weeping woman, she suddenly clung to my arm like a madwoman. Moreover, when I heard her tearful cries, she said, "Either you die or my husband dies, let one of you die. It is more painful to see two men suffer humiliation than to die." No, in that moment, she wished to cling to the surviving man. She gasped and cried out in desperation. At that moment, I felt a wild urge to kill the man. Gloomy excitement when I say this, I am sure I will appear to you as a more cruel person. However, that is because you cannot see the woman's face. In particular, you cannot see the blazing look in her eyes in that instant. When I locked eyes with her, I thought that even if I was struck down by divine thunder, I wanted to take this woman as my wife. To take her as my wife, this was the only thought in my mind. This was not the base lust you might imagine. If at that moment I had desired anything other than lust, I would have kicked her aside and fled. If I had done so, the man would not have had to stain my sword with blood. Yet, the moment I looked into the dim thicket and saw her face, I resolved that I would not leave until I killed the man. However, if I was to kill him, I did not want to do so in a cowardly manner. I untied the man's bonds and told him to draw his sword. The rope tied to the cedar root was what I had carelessly left behind. The man, with a look of fury, drew his sword without uttering a word. Before I knew it, he lunged at me in rage. I need not say what happened during that duel. My sword pierced his chest at the 23rd stroke. At the 23rd stroke, please remember this. Even now, I regard this as a point of pride. The only one I have ever fought to 20 strokes is that man alone. Cheerful smile as soon as the man fell, I lowered my blood-stained sword and turned to the woman. Then, what do you know? The woman was nowhere to be found. I searched the area, the cedars for where she had fled. But there were no signs on the bamboo leaves. Even straining my ears, the only sound I heard was the dying gasp from the man's throat. It is possible that, as soon as I began to fight him, the woman escaped through the thicket to call for help. When I thought of this, I realized that my life was at stake, so I took my sword and bow and arrows and quickly returned to the original mountain path. There, I found the woman's horse quietly grazing. I suppose it is unnecessary for me to recount the subsequent events. However, I did part with my sword before entering the capital. This is all I confess. After all, I have resigned myself to hang from a branch of the ouchi tree, so please subject me to the maximum penalty. Defiantly.
Confession of a woman who can come to Kiyomizu Temple. The man dressed in a dark blue kimono laughed mockingly as he forced himself upon me, glancing at my bound husband. How deeply my husband must have felt regret. But no matter how he writhed in agony, the ropes that bound him only dug in deeper. I instinctively ran to his side, as if to roll over to him. No, I intended to run to him. However, in an instant, the man kicked me down. At that very moment, I felt a strange brilliance in my husband's eyes. It was an indescribable light. Whenever I recall those eyes, I can't help but shudder even now. My husband, who couldn't utter a single word, conveyed everything in that fleeting moment through his gaze. But what sparkled there was neither anger nor sorrow, only a cold light that looked down upon me. I was more struck by the color of his eyes than by the kick from the man, and before I knew it, I cried out something unintelligible, ultimately losing consciousness. When I finally regained awareness, the man in the dark blue kimono had already disappeared. Only my husband remained bound beneath the roots of the cedar tree. I barely managed to raise myself from the fallen bamboo leaves and watched his face. Yet, the color of his eyes had not changed in the slightest. They still showed the cold contempt mingled with hatred. Shame, sorrow, anger. What I felt in my heart at that moment is hard to put into words. I stood unsteadily and approached my husband. Now that it has come to this, I cannot stay with you any longer. I am ready to die at once. However, you must also die. You have witnessed my shame. I cannot leave you here alone. I earnestly spoke these words, but my husband continued to look at me with loathing. While suppressing my nearly bursting heart, I searched for his sword. But perhaps it had been taken by that thief. Neither the sword nor even my bow and arrows could be found in the underbrush. However, luckily, a small dagger lay at my feet. I lifted the dagger and spoke to my husband once more. Then let me take your life. I will follow you immediately. When my husband heard these words, he finally moved his lips. Of course, his mouth was full of bamboo leaves, so his voice was inaudible. However, seeing him, I instantly understood what he wanted to say. With contempt in his gaze, he simply uttered, "Kill me." Almost in a dreamlike state, I plunged the dagger into his blue kimono-covered chest. At that moment, I must have lost consciousness again. When I finally looked around, my husband had already breathed his last, still bound. A ray of the setting sun fell upon his pale face from the sky, mingling with the bamboo. While stifling my cries, I untied the ropes binding his lifeless body. And, what happened to me then? That part I can no longer muster the strength to recount. In any case, I found myself unable to die. I tried stabbing the dagger into my throat and throwing myself into the pond at the foot of the mountain, attempting various means, but as long as I could not die, this too would not be something to boast about. A lonely smile, someone as pathetic as I might have been abandoned even by the great compassion of Kannon, the Bodhisattva of mercy. But what should I do, having killed my husband and encountered the thief? What am I to do? What am I to do? Suddenly bursts into tears.
The story of the dead spirit borrowed by the Miko. The thief, having taken advantage of my wife, sat down and began to comfort her in various ways. Of course, I couldn't say a word. My body was bound to the roots of a cedar tree. But in the meantime, I tried to catch my wife's eye many times, wishing to convey the meaning, "Don't take what this man says seriously. Consider everything he says a lie." However, my wife sat there, quietly looking down at her knees, seemingly absorbed in the thief's words. I was writhing in jealousy. The thief was skillfully continuing his conversation. He said that if she had ever been touched by another man, she would never be able to reconcile with her husband. Wouldn't it be better to be with someone who truly loved her than to remain with such a husband? It was because he cherished her that he had dared to act so boldly. He even brought up that topic. When the thief said this, my wife lifted her face dreamily. I had never seen such a beautiful wife as I did then. But what did that beautiful wife say in front of me, who was bound? Even as I was lost in a haze, every time I recalled her response, I felt an overwhelming rage. She surely said, "Then please take me anywhere." Long silence. My wife's sin was not just that. If that had been all, I wouldn't have suffered as much in this darkness. But my wife, as if in a dream, took the thief's hand and tried to go out of the thicket. Suddenly, her complexion changed, and she pointed at me, bound to the cedar roots. "Please kill him. I cannot be with you while he is alive." My wife shouted this many times, as if she had gone mad. "Please kill him." Those words, like a storm, still try to blow me down into the distant depths of darkness. Has there ever been such hateful words uttered by a human mouth? Has there ever been such a cursed phrase that touched a human ear? Has there ever been such a sudden burst of laughter? When he heard those words, even the thief lost his color. "Please kill him," my wife cried out, clinging to the thief's arm. The thief gazed at her silently, neither affirming nor denying her request to kill me. Before I could even think, my wife, with a single kick, was knocked down onto the bamboo leaves. Another burst of laughter. The thief quietly crossed his arms and glanced at me. What does that woman intend to do? Will she kill him or save him? Just nod for a reply. Will you kill him? Even for this one line, I would want to forgive the thief his sins. Again, long silence while I hesitated. My wife suddenly let out a scream and dashed into the depths of the thicket. The thief, too, jumped after her in an instant, but it seemed he didn't even catch her sleeve. I could only watch that scene like a phantom. After my wife had escaped, the thief picked up his sword and bow and arrows, cutting one of my ropes. Now it's my turn. I remember murmuring this as the thief vanished into the thicket. The place was quiet. No, there was still someone crying. I listened carefully as I untied my ropes. But when I noticed the sound, it turned out to be my own voice weeping. For the third time, long silence, I finally managed to lift my exhausted body from the cedar roots. Before me lay a small knife dropped by my wife, glinting. I picked it up and stabbed it into my chest in one thrust. A foul, bloody mass surged up in my throat. Yet there was no pain. My chest grew cold, and everything around me fell silent. Ah, how profound the silence is. In the shadowy thicket of this mountain, Not even a single bird comes to sing. Only the lonely shadows of cedar and bamboo drift around. The shadows, yes, they gradually grew fainter. I could no longer see the cedars or bamboo. I lay there, wrapped in deep silence. At that moment, someone approached me stealthily. I tried to look in that direction. But a dim light had gathered around me. Someone, whoever it was, with unseen hands, gently pulled the knife from my chest. At the same time, blood surged once more in my mouth. With that, I sank forever into the darkness of the middle realm.